Hi, I'm Coffee Kevin. Welcome to Sample Roasting. This presentation packs a double punch. After years of foods becoming more and more processed and refined, many people find enjoyment in doing it all from scratch. And nothing says scratch like roasting your own coffee. Lots of folks' final frontier is roasting their own beans. Even if you don't ever decide to roll your own, so to speak, a key step to understanding coffee selection is to know that an important part is to actually roast it and then taste it. Unlike roasting in a larger roaster to sell it, this sample roasting is done using a small amount of beans, just enough to brew a small amount of coffee, which is tasted to evaluate the beans before deciding upon buying them. And it's coffee's version of a test drive, and your favorite roaster likely takes these test drives several times a day. Our professional tour today through this process is Chris Petrovich of Metropolis Coffee. Chris's title is Green Coffee Buyer and Roasting Manager. Chris, is sample roasting necessarily lighter roasted than the coffee we end up getting in the store?
Generally, yes, and I think it's to each company on what works best for them. For Metropolis, we generally do a lighter roast. We kind of keep that roast consistent for any coffee that we're sample roasting, just to kind of eliminate the variables, to really narrow in and hone in on what the coffee has to offer. So for us, it works better for it to be a lighter roast.
I notice your title, Chris. What does the title really mean? Green coffee.
Yeah, so a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is managing the inventory of the coffee that we have, our menu, planning for the future, making sure that we have coffee to fulfill blends that we offer year-round, keeping up with fresh single origin coffees that I can kind of spread out through the year to have on the menu to kind of highlight what's fresh and what's unique and fun out there. Kind of just the day-to-day of making sure we have what we need in the warehouse to roast to fulfill production, as well as managing the quality and making sure things are tasting the way that we expected and contracted them initially.
Now, when you roast, are you trying to play with how dark you'll want to roast it for real in the big roaster that roasts the final in-store coffee that we all buy?
Generally, no. I think that a lot of what you're doing is, like I said, minimizing variables. We're not necessarily looking for that perfect roast profile yet. If I'm looking to source a new component for a blend, so a blend that we have year-round, coffees are seasonal, and so we can't have the same coffee year-round, year after year, because we're going to run out of that lot. And so my job is to find coffees that fulfill that profile time and time again. And so I'm just trying to see when I'm sample roasting if that coffee has the characteristics that I'm looking for. And if it does, then we will move forward with a contract with an importer or with a seller. And once we get that coffee in our warehouse, then we can start doing some test roasting on our 15 kilo ProBet machine, which is one of our production roasters. So we're never actually doing production roasts on the sample roaster. And what we're doing when we bring it in and start doing sample roasts is, first of all, we determine what we want this coffee to be. Is this a body component in a blend, or is this a single origin? Do we want this to be balanced throughout the entire cup? With that said, there are different techniques that roasters are familiar with in roasting that can highlight certain characteristics like the acidity or the body. Do we want this coffee to be balanced, or do we want the acidity to be the focal point of the coffee? So we might do 2 or 3 different test roasts of the coffee, and then myself and our roasting team we are composed of the quality control team here at Metropolis. We will taste them and discuss them and determine what we like about each of the roasts. Maybe we'll tweak them from there, or maybe we nailed it right off the bat, and that will kind of determine the founding roast profile for that coffee. And then time after time again, week after week, we will continue to taste the production roast and make sure they're still tasting the way that we want them. If need be, we can bring them onto the sample roaster and do some small tests to make sure the quality is still there based on the original sample roast that we tasted.
Now, which roaster makes better coffee? Sometimes when you, I'm just trying to think, I visited a bakery once, and they were actually cooking some baking cookies, I guess you'd say, that they were going to go into production with. And one of the employees confided to me that, Well, they taste great now. You know, a lot of times they don't taste as good when they're mass produced. It sounds like it's the opposite with coffee.
In terms of mass producing, I think that, you know, we don't do any mass producing. Our largest batch that we'll do here at Metropolis is about 130 pounds at a time. The smallest batch, maybe 20 pounds at a time for production use. I find that if you're doing, you know, 10 different roasts of small batch coffees, there's probably going to be some slight inconsistencies within those 12 batches, even of the same coffee, even if they were roasted by the same roaster on the same machine on the same day. Where if you're roasting a larger batch on a larger machine, and all that coffee from that day is coming from that batch, it's going to be a more even and consistent batch because it was all just one roast rather than 10 roasts throughout the day. So there is a benefit to doing large batches, but I think small batches allow you to kind of hone in the techniques necessary for translating that to a larger batch.
So it sounds like the size batches you do is already an advantage because it's a smaller batch. You truly are doing what's considered small batch roasting rather than a giant,
yes, and
giant
we roast to order
roaster.
at Metropolis. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. We also do roasting to order here too. So anything that is ordered is roasted the following day. And so we're not roasting a ton of surplus and just having that sitting around necessarily because we want it to be as fresh as possible for the customer.
Now, Chris, did you learn roasts on a home roaster, or have you always roasted on a larger, I call it a commercial roaster like this?
Yeah. No, I actually, from the time I first became a barista when I was 15 years old, I thought it'd be cool to be a roaster. I never really knew what that was or what that meant. It just sounded like what I wanted to do. And I had worked, you know, at a lot of different cafes over the years. And until I got a job at Metropolis' cafe as a barista. And about a year into working there, a position opened up for a roasting job. And it was the first opportunity I had ever come by that offered that. And I applied for it. And I was thinking to myself, you know, how am I going to sell myself when I have no experience roasting coffee? Sure, I love coffee, but you know, what kind of skills do I have that can translate? And so I don't know if you're familiar with Big Green Eggs. I'm a big smoker. I like to barbecue a lot, and so I have a Kamado style grill at home, which is all manually operated, and so I'm working with variables of heat and time and things like that, and you know, cooking the same types of meats or vegetables every weekend, and so I'm learning based off of what I did previously and translating that information to the future. Cook to see if I can improve upon it, and so I think that maybe those skills helped translate, you know, my want for becoming a roaster. But no, I never really did any home roasting until I got the job as a roaster, and then I started messing around with some whirly popcorn popper roasts, and I never really made anything that great at home.
Absolutely, the Big Green Egg. It's interesting you bring that up. I constantly, of course, I'm interviewing people in coffee. It's amazing. The culinary and coffee joined at the hip, definitely. I mean, everybody seems like is into some level of cooking and cuisine art. Cuisine, not cuisine. I'm mentioning a brand name. Do you ever blend using sample roasts?
You can, yeah. So, I mean, if you're looking to create a potential blend with all coffees that you don't already own, you could be sampling in, you know, multiple coffees that would be, you know, potentially created into a blend. And so, yeah, I could do, you know, say if I'm trying to come up with a 50-50 blend of, say, a Colombia and a Brazil, I could source samples of Colombians and Brazils that I think I would be interested in, do sample roasts, and then I could, you know, blend them together in different ratios to kind of see if it's what I'm looking for. You know, you can still get an idea of what the end product is going to be on a production batch, but really it's best to probably taste them on their own, because you can really see the full potential of that bean on its own, and have a better sense of whether or not that will work in a blend with another coffee.
Now I'm almost, I think, approaching this from the opposite side. Do all varieties, do all single origins roast identically? Are some easier than others?
No, and so that's one of the things that you have to consider when you're sample roasting, because like I said, you want all the variables to be pretty constant through this process, whether you're roasting 10 different coffees in a day, all from different origins or different processes. They're all going to roast a little bit different, and so I think that I start the same way every time, and I don't make adjustments until they're needed. A normal sample roast can range anywhere between 6 and 10 minutes. We generally fall somewhere in between, but sometimes first crack can happen earlier, sometimes it happens later, and that has a lot to do with where that coffee comes from, the moisture content, the processing of it, the temperature that was in the drum prior to roasting it. These are all things that we don't necessarily have as much control over, so the things that we do have control over, we like to maintain consistency in. And so, yes, a denser coffee, a higher moisture content coffee is going to probably take maybe a little bit longer. I'm applying the same heat level to every roast at the beginning of the roast and letting it do what it needs to do naturally until I get to a certain phase where I know that it's time to make a slight adjustment.
Now, would you say Metropolis, do you consider Metropolis to have a roast philosophy?
Yes, I do. I think in Metropolis, a lot of what we focus on is bringing the best out of the bean. In balancing in a way that does justice to the bean itself. Coffee is as good as it can be when it arrives here. All we're really trying to do is not screw it up. You know, there are a lot of roast defects you can do or create, which makes the coffee taste awful. There are a lot of ways that you can ruin the coffee through roasting. So there are a lot of ways that we've discovered that bring the best and the most out of the coffee that we see fit and to give justice to that coffee. And so to us, balance is very important. We like to highlight every characteristic that's available in that coffee. Some coffees, however, you know, an Ethiopian or a coffee from Kenya, maybe we might tweak a little bit in the roast profile to kind of highlight and accentuate the acidity, because that is kind of a prized characteristic of coffees from that region. But generally, we like them to still be balanced.
I definitely think if I were going to distill down what you just told me, it's sort of a physician do no harm to the coffee, because sometimes I taste coffees and if someone didn't point out the varietal to me, I would have no idea, particularly extra dark roasts. Is that about for espresso? Do you consider espresso a different animal in the sense of roasting, or is it similar?
Sure, because you know, espresso is an intentional blend. It's, you know, it can be of course drank in many different ways. It can be brewed as a V60, as a Chemex, as an espresso, but its intent is for it to be a great espresso. And so when we're blending the coffees and sourcing the coffees and roasting the coffees, we have in mind that this is going to be pulled as a shot of espresso. And so when we're doing our quality control every week and tasting the roast of our coffees, we're tasting the components in our espresso, but ultimately it's about how they taste as an espresso, not how they taste on a cupping table, that determines whether or not we're completely satisfied with that product.
Now, I think it's time to let you roast some coffee.
All right, cool. So right here, this is our sample roaster. It's a Probat. It's the same manufacturer as our production roasters, German manufacturer. This is a BRZ2, a 2-barrel system from 2014. We're only going to be using this barrel right here. I'm going to do one sample roast. I've had the machine warming up for probably an hour and a half now. That's just you want it to warm up like at least 30 minutes. You don't want to just charge it up to 400. It's like preheating an oven. You don't turn the oven to 400 and throw a frozen pizza in, because it's not going to cook the way it's intended. You need to warm it up and evenly distribute the heat. And so generally you want to get it to your temperature to hold for 20 to 30 minutes before you start roasting. So I have it sitting here. This is a dial right here that shows the exhaust air temperature. It's pretty much one of the only tools that I have during this process outside of this pulley right here, which will allow me to control the airflow. It switches airflow between the drum and the cooling tray. So right now I have it somewhat in the middle, holding constant, pulling air through and maintaining the heat and the atmosphere in the drum as I'm getting ready here to roast. And so, like I said, I like to minimize variables. I like to stay consistent in my process, so that way I have the best idea of what is happening with that coffee, and I'm not confused as to why certain things are happening. And so we do 100 grams of coffee every single time. I have the 100 grams here prepped. We're going to roast a Brazilian coffee. So like I said, I have it ready here at 400 degrees. I'm going to pull this lever out all the way, which transfers the air from the drum into the cooling air. So hot or air moving through heat increases temperature, so we're pulling that away now to reduce the temperature to 350 degrees on this dial. Once it hits 350 degrees, I'm going to charge the drum with the coffee. I have a timer here. This is another tool that we're going to use. And other than the tools that I've already specified, it's all sensorial. So what do I see? What do I smell? What do I hear? That's how we're going to determine where we're at in the roast and if things are going as planned. So got another probably 20 to 30 seconds here before I'm able to start charging this coffee. A lot of times you can do multiple roasts at a time. So if I have a large day of sample roasting ahead of me, I can have both of these drums warmed up and I can be roasting simultaneously at the same time. It just kind of cuts the time in half for the amount of time I have to roast on here. I like working with this machine. I like our smaller production roaster too. I don't know why. They just feel more intimate to me. I just have enjoy it a little bit more. All right, so we're approaching 350 degrees here. So I have my timer. I'm going to hit the button as soon as I charge the green coffee, and it's going to count upwards. All right, so now you can hear the coffee's turning in there. Now that I've charged the drum, I'm going to go down here and adjust my airflow. I'm going to put it back pretty much where I had it in the beginning. And we're going to see the dial on the exhaust go down to around 300-ish. And then it's going to start coming back up. Once it comes back up to around 340 to 350 is generally when I've noticed that we hit first crack. And obviously that can vary depending on the bean, the varietal, the processing of it. I have this tool right here. It's a long spoon. You can stick that in here and pull out green coffee samples to visually inspect. With roasting, there are numerous phases to indicate what's happening to the bean. Beans are very dense and full of moisture when they start, and so the beginning portion of the roast is just the bean losing its moisture, and it's going to start to caramelize some of the sugar. So you'll see it go from green to yellow to orange, and you'll notice a difference in the smell. It'll start to smell a little sweeter. Right now it just smells kind of grassy, hay-like. And that's how you know that you're progressing. So you kind of have different ideas of when you expect those phases to happen in a roast. And so you're monitoring what you're seeing visually in the drum and the time that you're at to determine whether or not things are going as planned. So we're about a minute and a half in here. No noticeable visual changes. I don't smell any difference yet, but we're still pretty early on in the roast. When you're roasting and you get to what's called first crack, it's the most important phase in production roasting, sample roasting. It's the internal pressure that's being built up in the bean as it's losing moisture. It becomes too much and it explodes, it opens up. It kind of sounds like popcorn popping. And at that point, the organic acids are at their highest peak in the coffee. And you have the most control over how that coffee is going to be balanced, the acidity in the body. And so it's important to not rush through first crack, to not rush into first crack, to just kind of gently move into that phase and then have complete control over the coffee during that phase so as to have a smooth, even development. So we're about 2.5 minutes in now. It's starting to yellow a little bit. Still smells kind of grassy, a little bit more intense than prior. There is a lot of waiting and downtime during a roast. And so if you have any questions or anything like that.
Well, I guess I'll throw this in. I'll throw a comment in first. When I tried home roasting, and I am, by the way, I've said this before, so I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm one of the world's worst home roasters. I have a hard time not only multitasking, but single tasking when I'm roasting. And my mind wanders, and I've burned more coffees than I've had come to completion. I'm surprised I haven't moved to the Pacific Northwest. But I definitely, my wife also didn't care for the peanutty's later, grassy smell. And, you know, a lot of people who instantly think, oh, I love coffee, I love the smell of coffee, think they'll love home roasting. And or I know you're sample roasting, but still roasting. And I found that only the joys of the smell are later in the roast for me.
Sure. I mean, I love all the smells. You get kind of used to it. I think it's kind of my cologne these days. I don't really smell much different than coffee roasting, but I mean, some people don't necessarily prefer the smell of the roasting process, and we don't. On this machine, we have an exhaust system that's pulling the air, and it's connected through the wall over here, and so it's pushing it all outside. On our production roasters, we have on our two larger ones afterburners, and so basically the exhaust is hooked up to these giant stacks that run through the roof of the building, and those burn at about 11 to 1200 degrees while we're roasting. It's basically burning up all the particulates in the smoke, minimizes the smell and the carbon emission into the atmosphere. Take a quick peek here. We're starting to see some orange, some light orange, dark yellowing. It's starting to smell a little sweeter. This is probably my favorite smell, actually, is this fave in roasting. It kind of reminds me of like a festival of some sort. Like, and I'm not really sure why.
I think I know. But definitely, the smell the sweeter smell is definitely more pleasant to, I think, anyone.
Definitely, yeah. So pretty soon here, within the next minute and a half or so, I'd say we'll start to see a little bit more browning. That's an indicator that we're going to be getting close to the first crack phase. I still haven't made any tweaks to this roast, by the way. So I still have the same amount of airflow running through the drum, which is maintaining the same consistent heat. I usually I prefer to minimize the amount of tweaks I have to make. It just, you know, if you're adding more airflow or more heat or whatever, or taking it away consistently, that's going to throw off the development of the roast. And you want a nice, smooth, bell-curved development in most roast profiles. Although when we do get to first crack, we are going to want to take off a little bit of the airflow from the drum. On a production roaster, you would remove a little bit of heat. As this coffee is drying out, it's building a momentum, its own energy, and it's continuing to rise in temperature faster by its own assistance. And so we actually want to pull back a little bit to allow the coffee to kind of push it through. If you don't do that, you're going to rush through first crack, and you're going to end up skipping, you know, through one of the most important phases in the development of the coffee.
Chris, is there any kind of movement, you know, spinning the beans around at this point, or is it just a flame in there?
Yeah, so the flame is underneath the drum, and so these are actually drum roasters. They're small drum roasters, and so the entire time it's spinning. Yeah.
Oh.
So I heard a crack there. We're at 7 minutes. So we're at the beginning of first crack. So I'm going to take a little bit of the heat off now. So I probably want to push this roast another minute and a half. I don't want it to get super dark, so I want to monitor the heat and the airflow to kind of maintain the same temperature and allow it to just breeze through smoothly and first crack. And at that point, I will transfer this lever here outwards, transferring all of the airflow from the drum to the cooling tray, and I will dump the beans into the cooling tray. And then the air will be pulling through the beans to cool them off. So hopefully you can hear the cracking of first crack.
Yeah, I'm hearing it.
Starting to look like coffee now. Lightly brown.
Yeah, I love it.
Can you smell it?
Yeah. I can't smell it, but I can imagine it.
All right, so we're getting pretty close, and so a lot of what I'm doing is visually inspecting it. I have an idea of the darkness of this coffee, of what it should look like.
So would you say your spoon is I know there's a word called a trier in roasting. Is it a trier? Is the spoon the trier?
No, it's not a trier. A trier, it kind of acts as the trier in the situation. A trier generally is a tool that would be on a roaster that would be spinning with the drum and the coffee, and when you need to access the coffee, you would pull it out and take a look and then put it back in. So this spoon just kind of reaches in and grabs, you know, a spoonful of beans and allows you to kind of do the same thing that a trier would. So I just dumped the coffee. It was a little under 9 minutes for the roast. I'm just evening out the beans right here. The roast looks nice and even and smooth to me. And it generally is going to take a couple minutes for it to cool down. When I'm doing sample roasting for making purchasing decisions or anything like that, I like to let the coffee rest for at least a day. So I won't necessarily taste this coffee and make a decision regarding buying or anything like that until at least a day later, because I like the coffee beans to have some time to degas. It allows for more even brewing, and it just makes things a little bit easier. So.
Okay, that's a great question that you just put in my head, and I've always wanted to ask this, and today your timing is perfect. When you say that, so there is such a thing as too fresh coffee?
Yep, there definitely is. Yeah, a lot of people think, you know, probably just assume that the fresher the roast, the better. And I'm not going to say that a fresh roast is not great, but generally I think that coffee brews better after a couple days of rest, just because it kind of has time to settle and to degas. The gas kind of interrupts and disrupts the brewing process, and so to minimize that allows for a more even extraction. And coffees can hold up quite well over, you know, for a month or so, depending on how you store them, and still taste like they were roasted just last week. Same with green coffees. Green coffees also have a shelf life, and a freshly harvested green coffee can almost taste too fresh sometimes. And so there have been situations in the past where we purchased a coffee that was from Colombia, and we had been purchasing coffee from this farm for many years, and we realized after a year or so that towards the end of its life on our menu is when it started to taste the best. And we hadn't done much with the tweaking of the roasting to like make such a significant difference, and we realized that it was that the green coffee gave a better result after it aged in our warehouse for a few months. And so we actually, sorry about that, implemented that process for aging that coffee before releasing it on our menu.
The crew here is asking, is our camera person still standing?
He is still standing.
Okay,
yes.
good, thank you. We just, I know I dropped a lens once. This is very early in my career. I'm surprised I had a career after that. But anyway, it's great. This is fascinating. A couple of things that have occurred to me, and one of them is sometimes when I visit a roaster and I leave with coffee, I've taken it home and I'm so excited I want to brew it the moment I get home, and it foams up so high. It's too fresh.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Thank you for demonstrating that. I have to be honest, I've certainly dropped by and visited people while they were sample roasting, but I've never stayed through the whole process and had it explained to me as well as you've done today, and I think we all really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kevin. This is really fun.
Thank you, Chris. This is Chris Petrovich, and your company is Metropolis Coffee, and you are Ben on the... Well, I remember you being in on the far north side, but you're what, near north now?
Yeah, we're in Avondale, so we're located at 3057 North Rockwell. So it's like right on the river, on like Belmont and Rockwell.
Beautiful location, and we have considered having CoffeeCon right next door so that we can, come over there and do some tasting with you. And in the future when we have in-person events again. But I really appreciated when we were kind of brainstorming about how best to utilize an appearance by you. This just, when you said it to me, I was like, yes, this is great. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great opportunity to do something like this. I think that a production roast was kind of my initial thought, but I think that would have been much more of a production. This is a little quieter, a little smaller scale, a little bit easier, and I think that people are not as familiar with sample roasting as they would be with production roasting.
Well, thank you, Chris Petrovich. This has been really fascinating. This is the type of field trip that I was always hoping that Miss Stoll would take us on in my kindergarten class, and never did. So I was forever disappointed with the school system, but I'm very happy at CoffeeCon to be able to do this and meet with everyone today and see this side of the industry that I agree with you, Chris. I don't think many people have. Again, Chris Petrovich, Metropolis Coffee, and thank you.
Thank you.